All right, this is going to be a video for people who have read Gardens of the Moon. Now, I have read the whole series, but I'm not going to talk in details about the whole series, but I am going to talk about things that might help as you are going forward in the rest of the series. As well, if you have read the whole thing, hopefully you'll get something out of this. In the past, it was book 3 that really compelled me to do these types of videos, because I was just seeing all sorts of things that were just hopping off the page in terms of themes, especially. Like, at first I just thought it was like amazing, especially at the end of book 2, and then book 3 I thought was like my favorite book of all time. But then I decided to do these videos because like I was highlighting everything. You should see my other ones from book 3 onward are just highlighted, and there's notes and things everywhere, and I never got to do that for book 1 and book 2. But I did want to, I did finish Gardens of the Moon, and I didn't want to leave it without maybe doing at least a couple of these sorts of videos of the things that I got out of it, because each of these books does have something, and I'm sure it has lots of things, but it does do a great job, in my opinion, better than any other series, at really honing in on specific ideas as you go through the books. And I think everyone kind of catches on to this by the time they get to book 4 and 5. And you see that, first of all, the prologues, even though they all kind of mesh into one great story, and again, there are ideas that are introduced early on that are, within all the stories, within the whole thing. It really does hone in on specific things, and the prologues of each of these specific books really does a great job in directing our attention for really what are going to be some of the central things in that specific book. There have been several times where I've been going through in book 3 and 4 and 5, and I actually go back to the prologue to see if there are things that now I have read that mean something differently going back into the prologue. And that's just one of the things that Steven Erikson does so well. I've only read one of Ian C. Esselmont's books. I'm hoping that as I go further into it in the future, he will do a lot of the same things. But really, I think you will find, if you've just started with this book and you are going to go on, I think you will find that Steven Erikson's prologues, he really makes use of these things, and they only get better as they go, in my opinion. Every time we get to a new one, I think, no, that's the best prologue, and I don't know any other author who does them quite like Steven Erikson, in the way that he foreshadows and in the way that he really condenses a lot of the themes that you will find for the rest of it in one little thing. And it's great as you're going through also. He will pick out some keywords that will help kind of reinforce that. And sometimes, this is a multi-POV series, as you've found if this is your first time going through it or if you've read it. It's a multi-POV, and sometimes he will have a lot of the characters kind of echoing the same sorts of dilemmas in some way, and sometimes within a matter of pages, as within one chapter, they're all kind of echoing the same type of thing, but it's going in different directions, if that makes sense. Now, one of the things that really stuck with me as I read it the first time, this first book, is, well, there's a couple things. First is with the coin, with Opon's coin. You see it coming up all over the place. And certainly the second time going through this book, the idea of fate and being used as a tool really stuck out with me. And it really it is used in a way that I think very well kind of is echoed or acts as like a launching pad for the rest of the series. Even though even the second time through, there are several plot points that even as someone who's read the 10, I still think, there was a lot going on. And even I don't necessarily understand all the plot points, but as far as some of the themes that are introduced, and some of the main characters, obviously we know who they are and things, but it really launches things off in a good way. Now I was doing a 4-hour drive home today, thinking of what types of things I could do for this book and really what I got out of it. Because my first time through the Gardens of the Moon, I thought this is very compelling, but I don't necessarily know uh, what I got out of it. You know, everyone said you got to get to the end of book 2 and you got to get to book 3, but I still wasn't really getting any major message out of it. And the second time through, I was, but it wasn't maybe hammered home in the way that some of these next books do. But as I was thinking about some of the central themes that I got during this 4-hour drive, I started to kind of note down a few names, and very quickly I kind of got to this idea in my mind of fate as being kind of a central thing, both within this book, but it will echo in the other books. Now, I won't go into any details necessarily, but fate and being used are things that will continue on. Now, we have Gnos Perrin, and there are a couple people that are using that are, the person that's using Gnos, this Alpon, the twins, are using Gnos and they're using Crocus in different ways. And people are recognizing this. Now, Gnos has this sword, and as he's going through the book, he's kind of wondering if he is the tool being used, or if he is merely holding the tool of, being used by Opon. And, if he's the tool, it sure seems like there's nothing he can do, and he has to let kind of fate do its thing. But if he's holding the tool, then again, there's this thing at this direction that he's given, that as soon as the fate starts to kind of turn, pass the tool on to your worst enemy and see what happens. And I love that scene. Maybe one of my favorite moments in Gardens of the Moon is when he stabs this sword into the table, and it looks like he's going to just break it as he's kind of thinking about these things. And I think it even makes mention as he's watching the water kind of ripple down through the grain of this wood, and that also kind of makes you sort of think about that, because obviously water would just take on whatever the grain was, and there's nothing much they can do. And I think Perrin's really going through this, and that's really stuck out to me. And I think, as you're going through it the first time, you kind of think, is he going to succumb to this god who's using him, or is he going to become like an unbound sort of agent of his own? Is he going to get rid of this sword and take on his own sort of role? Now, if we're going to talk about that or upon, we also have to consider Crocus, and he was one of the main people that I really loved in my first read through this. And you have all these different, it seems like he has a lot of influences on him, not only externally, but like internally. He almost can't get out of his own way, but now he has this coin, and it is he's getting out of these sticky situations at times, and by the end of the book, again, kind of like Gnos' sword, at least to me, he tosses this coin. So it feels like we get to cheer for Gnos and Crocus, and Crocus ends the book without this coin, and Gnos, rather than having, he went from this sword that was unbloodied, right? And he was kind of tied to the he was tied to the baggage of his household and his, the people who came before him, and what he's tied to. He's tied to his last name. And then he gets this other sword. And obviously he wonders if he's the tool or it's the tool. And then at the end, he gains this other Odotarl sword. And just how interesting that these swords that people wield will have these different, it's just very interesting, that progression. And I was thinking about that a little bit. I don't know if I've really come to a full conclusion of what that means to me, but I think it's very interesting what he eventually ends up with. And you will find kind of more as you go through the series how interesting that Odotarl is in the whole realm of things. Remember, Rallick was given this dust that kind of negates magic. It's almost like a barrier between him and magic. And Lorne had this sword, which was a barrier. And it just feels like it's a way of kind of choosing their own fate and not letting something else kind of influence them, right? And it kind of puts, as Lorne has it, she's an expert swordswoman, I guess, and kind of levels things. Anyway, I don't want to go too far on a tangent. Absalar is another one who's absolutely being used as a tool. The first one that we see, and we could go through the level of ways that she's used, but Cotillion, we know that he's kind of, he's called the rope. He's called the rope, and he's pulling the strings everywhere. We have a character in this book who's a literal puppet. How would he not feel like a tool? We have a character who's named Onos Tulan, who does something. It feels like he's being used for something, and then his name is now Tool, right? We have Lorne, who's absolutely kind of going through some of the same sorts of things that Perrin is going through, thinking, am I just a tool for the Empress, right? We have Tashrin's demon, Pearl, who just feels so bad for Pearl, as I don't know if Pearl's a female demon, but gets sent into that freaky sword, Dragnipur, that Rake has. We have Tattersail was another one who she was confronted at one point in this book by Lorne, and people had to tell Lorne that even though Tattersail did these things when Lorne was very young, she was being manipulated as this tool. We have Raced, the Jagged Tyrant, who was woken up for this express cause of, for this purpose of being somebody else's tool. Now, I was trying to find a way that the bridge burners are being used as a tool. And let me know what you guys think about them, but they seem like the opposite, where they are. I couldn't think of a reason why they are being used as anyone's tool, or they are resisting it. Now, it sounds like the Empress is trying to use them as such, but they are like the quintessential prime example of resisting that concept. And again, this idea that we get in Gardens of the Moon, the whole context we have at the Battle of Pale is we have the Malazans coming in, and we have this confederation of alliances sort of thing, where they are resisting being a tool, trying to have their own, control their own destiny sort of thing. We have Baruch, or Barak, however you pronounce that. I think it's Baruch. People keep coming to him. We have Turban Or coming to him. All these council members. We have Rake coming to him, and people realizing that, he is at the center of the influence here in Darujistan, and whichever way he goes is going to greatly influence things, and they want to almost, put their influence in him and make him into a tool of sorts. And again, this might be kind of over, you can find this in other fantasy books, but it really is heavy here. Heavy-handed, this concept. We have Circle Breaker, who is being used as this tool by the eel. And, sometimes you can be used as a tool in a poor way, or sometimes you can be used in the way that will benefit the person. And Circle Breaker, who I am so intrigued by, he gets kind of an honorable discharge from the eels, employ by the end. And I am just so interested in that. We have the Tiande. Now, I don't want to go too far into the Tiande. If you don't know who they are, though, we have these ancient races and things, and the Tiande are what the, Animander Rake was. They have this black skin, and he had this silver hair, and some of them we saw turned into dragons. Now, we'll get more about the Tiande and stuff, but obviously if you can turn into a dragon, you wonder what other sorts of, conditions might that bring in their life, right? I don't want to go too far into that, but it's very interesting. Very interesting. We have Calor, who, if you don't remember who he was with Kaladin Brood, who was allied with Animander Rake during the Resistance. And Calor was kind of like he was there. And we'll find more about Calor, but this second time through, I really thought about that guy and some of the things that we'll find out about him. And he must feel like he's bound in some ways too. I think about the Ravens and Crone. I think about the Crimson Guard, who are also a prime example, like the bridge burners of being, against this idea of being subject to anyone. The last subbook itself is about, it's named Fate, or, Fate, Fete. Sure sounds like fate. And again, that just is the thing that kept popping up. And as I was reading it the second time, I knew that party was coming up, the Fate. And it's just interesting how it all plays out. And we have Lady Simtal given this dagger at the end, and her house is just taken over literally. And it just seems like early on in this book, in this series, with this book, we have this idea of resisting being anyone's tool, especially any of these gods, or being a tool of our own, different natures that might be struggling, not struggling, but our natures that might kind of push people one way or another, or the Malazan Empire. And again, it's so interesting that we have these masks, and we have all these different influences going around, and we have these masks, and we have, I think it was Baruch, who had no interest in hiding his own identity. He just had it over his eyes. And we have, shout out to Kruppa, who has this mask, and everyone knows who it is. He's this you know, big round guy. Everyone who knows Kruppa knows who that is. And even Kruppa as the eel, people can see through his disguise. A couple of people do. And also a shout out to Rake with his mask. He makes great entrances. Anyway, really was thinking about that, and I'm going to keep thinking about Gardens of the Moon as I begin Deadhouse Gates. I think I don't want to leave it quite yet, but in some ways, even though some of the plot, if there was like a way that Steven Erikson would ever do a Gardens of the Moon 2.0, and maybe just, now that he's a great writer, and I think he became a greater writer, and if he ever touched up Gardens of the Moon, I'd have no problem with it to just maybe help us along a little bit as new readers. But I do think, in retrospect, now that I've read it twice, I do think that he brings up some very specific points that are important for the whole series that will continue to resonate. And he does that in Gardens of the Moon. Now, even though I don't get a lot of the same heart and connection with the characters as I do later on in the series, I do think he knew what he was doing. And even though we don't necessarily see it always the first time through, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people saw Fate as like a big part. It's a big part of it. But especially as you go read it in retrospect, having read the 10 books and seeing how that really gets pushed into the theme of the whole series in many ways, I just can't appreciate Steven Erikson more, even with this first book, who everyone kind of considers to be, or a lot of people consider to be, his worst of the 10 books in the Book of the Fallen. But and I would probably agree in a lot of ways that it is, but I still loved it, and I'm so glad to be, reading this. It just gets me even more excited to continue on, and I'm going to be reading at least the prologue of Deadhouse Gates today, because I just can't help it. So I will talk to you guys very, very soon, and make sure to let me know what other things you think were big parts of, big things that were introduced in Gardens of the Moon, because I'd like to know as well. And if you've made it this far, like and subscribe if you haven't. Maybe I'm going to try to maybe do less Malazan videos in terms of, like, in the past I did it per chapter. I'm not going to do that. But I'm going to maybe do things as I feel like themes come up. Some of them will be filled with spoilers for the rest of the series. Some will be up to that point to kind of, talk to people as they are going along. And some will be, I guess those are the two, options. Anyway, so I'll talk to you guys soon. And also, I should mention, we're still active on the Discord, which is on Matt's Fantasy Book Review. I should have a link below where we have, there's tons of different pages and things, but we have an area for first-time Malazan readers where you can come and ask questions and speculate and things, and people will be very sensitive about what kind of things they give you. They helped me along the way, and I didn't get spoiled for like anything. So if you want to do that and have a place to do that, on Matt's Fantasy Book Review under Dan Explores Books, it says, let's see, let me just open it up to make sure. At the bottom of my little section, it has Malazan First Readers. Good place to go if you want to put brackets under. You can spoiler blocks things for other people who maybe aren't at the same spot as you. And if you are a full Malazan veteran, I'm active on the Malazan reread spoilers part and we have general chat and all that stuff. Anyway, so come over there and subscribe if you haven't, if you would like, and I'll talk to you guys later.